Welcome back to Just Callum. So nice to have you with me. Today we're going to be doing a comparison between a tent and a hammock. So keep watching to find out the differences between the two, the positives, the negatives, and which one may be better. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to start off with the hammock. Now we're going to be looking at 5 different things throughout this comparison video. We're going to be looking at the ease of setup, the weight when carrying, comfort, warmth, and general practical use. So, ease of setup. Well, as you'll see by this video, is me setting up, it was very easy to set up. I did a bow line at one end, a trucker's hitch at the other, and then just put the poles in and elasticate them up for my fly netting. Very simple, very basic, but does the job. So ease of setup, I would say it's very easy to set up. I think generally if you know a couple knots, any hammock is very easy to set up. The only drawback with a hammock is you do need 2 solid trees to be able to tie it to. Otherwise, of course, it gets very tricky in how you're going to tie it up. But 2 solid trees and you're good to go. So ease of setup is very simple. Cool. So the next point, weight and carrying. Well, this hammock itself probably weighs less than 3 kilos all in, with the mesh, the rope, and all the other little bits that go with it, and the hammock itself, of course. So very, very light, and generally lighter than a tent, depending on obviously on which tent you bring, but generally lighter than a tent. So I would say weight for the hammock is very, very good. Comfort, well, I can tell you from this right now that not only am I incredibly comfortable, but because of my fly net, I've got plenty of room above my face and nice and relaxed. It does bend to the shape of my back and legs, so very comfy. I can even, if I rotate my feet to the left and my shoulders to the right in a hammock, I can actually almost completely flatten myself out. So if you don't like sleeping with a bend in your back, you can flatten yourself out and it'll be a lot more comfortable for the long night's sleep. So yeah, very, very comfy with a hammock indeed. I would give that very high rating indeed. So very, very comfortable. The 4th thing, warmth. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the hammock generally isn't very warm. A couple things you can actually do to improve the warmth is either bring a roll mat with a reflective back edge, so you can reflect all your heat towards you, and tuck that either on top underneath you here, or in the actual flap between the 2 linings of the hammock. Or you can bring yourself an air mattress and tuck that in to the hammock's secondary layer, and it does give you a bit more space from the material, and of course it then means that you have a bit of air gap between you and the bottom of the hammock, which of course is a great insulator. So warmth, it's not great on its own, but it can be very warm if you prepare correctly. And then practical use. You don't have a lot of space. Unlike a tent, there's not a lot of vestibule area and move and wiggle room. You do have the width. You do have the width of the actual unit, which is quite big, as you can tell. But when it comes to actually practically being moving around and getting changed and all these different things you'll do while camping, cooking and all that, it's not particularly practical. One thing I have noticed though, the positive side of the practicality of a hammock, not only does it take only a few minutes to set up, it's very light, but getting in and out, just a case of lifting my legs up, twisting myself, and I'm out. I can access the floor straight away, shoes will be directly underneath me, so very easy to get in and out of. This is different obviously to a tent where you're crawling around on the floor on your hands and knees and you're shuffling around. It's quite awkward. So that's a positive side of a hammock. So that's the hammock review. Let's have a look at the tent. Okay, so moving on to the tent. Of course, as you'll see in this previous video, it wasn't too bad to set up at all. I did have to clear some debris out of the way. I had to find some flat land, but those are the 2 main features of when setting up a tent. You also need to be very aware and wary of the fact that with a tent, if you camp on what could be or has been floodplains, which you can tell by the look of the ground, then you might have to be mindful that you'll need a bucket tent with a bucket ground sheet, because otherwise you could get very wet. And even if you do have a bucket ground sheet, it still may spill over and get you and your gear very, very wet. So bear that in mind. That is one downside to the setup of the tent. But actually setting the tent up, very simple, very easy, as you can see. I think it took me less than 5 minutes, as most tents are very, very simple to set up. So that's something positive for this tent. Moving on to the second part of the comparison is the weight. Now, tents generally are bigger than a hammock and a tarp. Tents generally are more cumbersome than a hammock and a tarp. Generally, when you strap them to your bag, they'll almost always be on the outside. Not because you don't want to keep them dry, but because they are quite big. It doesn't necessarily apply to every single tent, but in this case, a lot of tents and a lot of, in comparison to our hammocks, are very big and very heavy. So weight-wise, it's probably better to have a tarp and hammock, especially if you have the option to tie up a hammock between two trees. So that's the weight. So maybe consider that when you're going out on your next adventure. Third point is comfort. Now, I can tell you from past experience and from this experience that comfort in a tent is very high. When you're in the tent, loads of leg room, loads of top room, loads of vestibule space. So for comfort, moving around and getting a nice big airbed, it makes perfect sense to do such. Warmth-wise, it is definitely better than the hammock because it has two skins, so it's going to be a lot better at keeping your warmth in, unlike the hammock, which only has a single skin. Now, that's the heat, the comfort, the ease of setup, and the weight. Practicality, probably the most important one. Well, when it comes to being practical, unfortunately, the tent is more cumbersome, so it is harder to carry and so forth. It is a longer setup time because you've got poles and you have to find a flat piece of land, but it is a lot more freeing in the sense that you can put it almost anywhere, unlike the hammock, which you require trees. But negative side of the practicality is because when you have a tent, you have to enter and exit via your hands and knees. So it means when getting out of the tent itself, it's going to be a bit uncomfortable in and out. But space to store stuff, there's a lot. Space inside, there's a lot. So there are definitely positives and negatives to both the hammock and the tent. Let's go over these now. That was the positives and negatives about both the tent and the hammock. Positives, of course, hammock is off the ground. It's a lot easier set up, but you do need the two trees to be able to do that. Tent, yes, you can put it anywhere, but you've got to be a lot more careful where you put it because you might get flooded. You have to make sure the ground is flat, and of course you have to make sure there's no debris underneath you that will ruin your night's sleep. So definitely positives and negatives to both. Well, which one is better though? Let's think. Hammock's off the ground, but the tent's got more room. But the hammock could be more comfortable. But the tent is warmer. I would say the best option is neither, because it depends. It depends whether you're going to a forest or somewhere where you can hang your hammock up, or if you're going to somewhere more open where you're going to need its own stable structure. So both of them are brilliant in their own right, but unfortunately I can't choose because they're superb in both ways. So if it was me and I was camping in this sort of place, or somewhere with even limited amount of trees, I would probably go for hammock every single time. But if, like I do a lot, you go somewhere where there's a lot more open space, a lot fewer trees, then I would have to go for the tent. It's a self-contained unit. But there we go. Hammocks, tents, both very practical in their own right. And of course, they both have their own suitabilities. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been informative to you about these two items. And of course, you've learned something. If not, that's fine. Please drop me a like. If you have learned something, please also drop me a like. It's all very appreciated. And of course, I do encourage you to subscribe as well. That would be brilliant. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next one.